Hi, I'm Jamie Court. I'm president of ConsumerWatchdog. We're here today because Californians have been paying an extraordinary amount for their gasoline compared to people in America. As this slide from the report shows, the gap between U.S. and California gas prices were never higher in all the years they've been tracked as compared to 2015. In 2015, California gas prices compared to the U.S. gas prices were as much as $1.20 more. Traditionally, there's a 30-cent gap between California and U.S. gasoline prices. Currently in Los Angeles County, there is a 75-cent gap between gas prices in California and America. Californians have been getting gouged, and today we understand the reason why even more clearly. The gap, as we go to the next slide, Evan, between U.S. and California gas prices has cost drivers in the state over $7.5 billion. California drivers have paid $7.5 billion extra for their gasoline because oil refiners have kept us on low inventories, scarce gasoline, and they're not filling this market the way they should. The result is every California driver has paid $314 more since we've had low supplies and low inventories this year due to refinery outages and oil industry refining profiteering. That's why we're here today. Oil companies have consistently said environmental rules and taxes are the reason for higher gas prices. Well, the proof in the profit reports is that oil company profiteering is the reason for higher gas prices in California. This figure, $7.5 billion more paid by Californians, excludes the tax differential between U.S. and American gas prices. In other words, there is a 15-cent difference between gas price taxation in America and California, and we have taken out that extra 15 cents that Californians pay for taxes. So when we say Californians have paid $7.5 billion more for their gas than U.S. motorists, that's already adjusting for tax differences. That $7.5 billion is almost all pure profit for the oil refiners. The oil refiners' own profit reports show that they have had the best 2015 in oil refining in California ever. Tesoro, Valero, Chevron are the only oil refiners in the state that report their refining profits, and they have all had their best years ever for oil refining in this state. Valero and Tesoro very specifically report their oil refining from California. So we know that Valero's quarterly profits are 6.5 times more than their average California profit. Tesoro specifically reports its California profits. Tesoro is the second largest refiner in the state, has 27% of the refineries, and we know they made $1.5 billion in profit in the first 9 months of this year from their own profit reports. That's the best year ever for the second largest refiner. Chevron, the largest refiner, reports refining, but not specifically in California. It does it for all around the country, but we know 54% of its assets, its refining capacity, is in California. So when they have the best 9 months in refining, Chevron, we know California is driving that. California has been this gold rush for these three big refiners. But what's more is that as we've had record gas price gaps with America, as we've had record profits for the big refiners who report their refining, we've also had record lobbying spending by those big refiners to protect their profits. And that's what this report finds. 2015 was the year of the oil refiner in California. Record profits, record prices, record political influence peddling expenditures to protect those profits. And this year, those profits were at issue in Sacramento. There was a bill called SB 350 that would have required that petroleum production be cut by 50% in this state, or petroleum use be cut by 50% in the state in 15 years. It would have been a state target. And the oil refiners stopped it from becoming a law in Sacramento. with all this extra money they've made off our profits and put into their lobbying. That is what we know about this industry, and I'm going to turn it over in a second to Cody Rosenfield. What we don't know about this industry is frightful, and it needs to change. The recommendations of this report are that the California Energy Commission's Petroleum Advisory Market Committee, which was appointed by the governor to look at market manipulation in the gas market, take specific action next month to fix what we don't know about this industry. The California Energy Commission should require that every refiner in the state report their oil refining profits very specifically as Tesoro and Valero do. They should require that these refiners explain why we don't have enough supply when refineries go down, and be very clear about when they're going to come back online so that the market can compensate for these losses. And they should also require oil refiners to have a plan to meet inventory needs of this state. It's simple transparency. And next month on December 15th, when the Petroleum Market Advisory Committee is slated to meet, we would like to see them adopt those recommendations so that 2016 doesn't become another year of Californians getting gouged and California oil refiners getting rich. The governor was pushing for that SB 350 mandate and got beat by big oil, and he needs to take a step forward. The proof that the oil refining profits are what is driving higher gas prices is in the profit reports. This isn't about environmental regulation or taxes, the oil refiners said. If it were true, the oil refiners wouldn't have made billions more this year. I mean, we're talking $1.5 billion more for Tesoro. We're talking, hundreds of millions more for Valero, $2.5 billion for Chevron. You can see in the profits we know about that we're starting to get towards the $7.5 billion figure. And so I'm going to let Cody Rosenfield, who wrote this report and did a great job with it, explain specifically what the increases were in profitability for all the companies, what the increases in profitability were for the lobbying by these companies, and to process, what that means for Californians. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm Cody Rosenfield. I'm a researcher here. I'm one of the authors of this report. Evan, if you would go to the next slide. First, this is Valero, which is the fourth largest refiner in the state. And as you can see, the profits this quarter are almost 3 or 4 times more what they usually make in a quarter.
This is the third quarter, sorry.
Yeah, this is the third quarter. They made $342 million, 6.5 times more than what they usually make. Evan, if you go to the next slide. Tesoro is the second largest refiner, and they made $1.5 billion in the first 3 quarters of this year. And that's actually more than double what they've ever made in the first 3 quarters of any year. And this is an analysis that we did using Tesoro data. It doesn't take into account amortization or depreciation costs. Evan, if you would flip to the next slide. If you would flip to the next slide. Oh, there you go. This is Chevron's first 9 months, also record first 9 months. As Jamie said, 54% of Chevron's refining takes place in California. So a huge majority of these profits are coming from California. The West Coast is the most profitable region for most refiners, but especially Chevron because they have such a huge stake, and they are the largest refinery in California. Evan, if you would switch to the next slide. I'm going to briefly go into some lobbying here. So these are Chevron's lobbying numbers. Also a record year for lobbying. They spent over $3 million lobbying, and they're known for spending a lot of money, more than the other refiners, but this is a deviation even for them. Evan, if you the next one. This is Western States Petroleum Association, which is the oil industry lobby. They all give money to this industry trade group. And this is how much they've spent in 2015, also the record year for highest spent lobbying ever. Evan, if you would go back a couple slides to Tesoro and Valero. There you go. And these are Valero's first 9 months lobbying. As you can tell, 2014 was a pretty large lobbying year for them, but 2015, once again, is the record.
What's the gap, the increases, Cody, between?
Usually, Valero spends about $100,000. Now they spend over $600,000. So they spend about 6 times more in this quarter than they've averaged since 2005. And Evan, the next slide. Tesoro usually spends one back of. Tesoro usually Tesoro usually spends $50,000, as you can see, less than $50,000. But of course, 2015 they spent $400,000, about 8 times more than they usually spend. So while they're making record profits, they're also spending the most on lobbying ever. And the spending is they're spending in the legislature in order to protect these profits and make sure that their profitability continues in the state. I'm going to turn it back over to Jamie Court.
So the takeaway from all of this is that these oil refiners are, paying in Sacramento to profit off all Californians. And the big thing that they've gotten for their money is not just a defeat of a legislative act to codify a 50% reduction in petroleum use. They've also been able to stave off legislation that we've recommended for greater transparency about their profitability and their activities in the state. And we hope this is the last year that's going to happen. We hope that next year the legislature, if the Energy Commission won't, will adopt recommendations so that we can look at every refiner in the state, see how much they're making, see what type of reasons in real time they're giving for their refinery outages and their exports, and to make sure that they have a plan filed with the state to make sure there's ample supply in times when the refineries go down. Because bad news for refiners when the refineries goes down means good news for their profitability down bottom line. And that's a real problem. When refiners can make a killing by making less gasoline, they're going to make less gasoline and make that killing. And so we need to change that system. And I think this report sums up what we've been seeing all year with profit reports, that if we allow oil refiners to hide in the dark and charge whatever they can for a gallon of gasoline, they're going to charge us $1 more than the rest of America, and they're going to make billions more here than they are in the rest of America, especially at a time when they're companies that have crude oil production aren't making so much off crude oil. Now they have an incentive to make it off obscene refining profits. So let me open it up to questions. First, anybody in the room have a question? And then we'll open the line, but we'll see who in the room can ask a question. Yeah.
Couple of questions. Firstly, what kind of protections do you guys say that these companies are getting as a result of this lobbying, this increased spending in the legislature?
Well, they this year have gotten the votes of Democrats in the Assembly who refused to vote on the toughest measures to curb petroleum use and to even curb exhaust emission use from the tailpipes of cars. There was a huge defeat for the Democratic leadership of this state. Governor Brown, Tony Atkins, the Speaker, and Senator De Leon could not get through the Assembly legislation to set a standard that would have meant something in Paris on November 30th, where there's UN talks on climate change. They wanted the standard that said a 50% reduction in petroleum by 2030 is something we're going to set as a goal and meet. And we could have met it with electric vehicle use. What they are getting in Sacramento for their money is a continued reliance on this black gold, on fossil fuel that's taking its toll on its environment, but also that they're making a killing on. There is no question that within 5 years we're going to have EVs vehicles, electric vehicles, EV, that are more cost efficient than the fossil fuel burning ones. And setting a standard by the state that we get there would have just ensured that we had the proper incentives to do it. So they won that in the legislature, but also they prevented any legislator from issuing a subpoena to get the oil executives to testify before the Senate, as we've asked for, and they prevented legislation, as we've recommended, to require that oil refiners open their books and show us what their supplies are and where the money's going. We're hoping after the very end of this legislative session, when the governor and the legislative leaders were defeated in their efforts, that they may be a little bit more bold next year in wanting to take this on and realize that you can't work with the oil industry. You have to work against them if you're really going to want to protect Californians.
Now, are you saying that because these companies are making so much money that they should be turning that over to the consumer in the lower costs for gasoline?
No, what we're saying is they shouldn't be making so much money. They're making so much money because at a time when crude oil costs are really, really low, because they're keeping the state running on empty. They don't adequately supply California with gasoline. And they do that by having refineries that go down, probably too often. They do it by not bringing imports into the state, which they can do when those refineries go down. And they do it by manipulating 85% of the state's gasoline stations that they control the price at the pump on, those branded stations, by charging them too much for gasoline so that the street price stays high on gasoline. These are all tactics we've detailed for the Attorney General, for the Petroleum Market Advisory Committee at the California Energy Commission, and in the legislature. These tactics are not something anyone has been able to prosecute these companies for. But they're wrong. It doesn't happen in other states. And this is resulting, as we showed in today's report, in pure profits, billions and billions of extra profits for the oil refiners, where every Californian is paying $341 more than they should for their gasoline after we adjust for relative differences in taxes. So the oil refiners have us over a barrel. And what we're saying is the way to get that barrel taken away, if you're not literally going to just cut petroleum use by 50%, is to make the oil refiners open their books, show us not only how much they're making in every case off oil refining in California, we have a little window here, but also show us why refineries go down, testify under, or file a statement under penalty of perjury about when they're going to come back up. Because if the market knows they're not coming back up, in the case, as in the case of Exxon Torrance, for literally 7 months, then it's going to have to import gas. And they should have plans to import gas. It's the darkness, it's the opaqueness of this industry that's a problem. It's also that we have 4 refiners that control 80% of the refining in the state, 78% of the refining in the state. We can look into the books of Valero and Tesoro, the number 4 and the number 2 refiners. We can look into Chevron a little bit, the number 1 refiner, but we can't see into those other refiners at all. And we need to, in order to basically have enough sunshine to prove when they're gouging.
Do you think that opening the books, that these companies would even care? You think that they're...
Well, they care enough that they fight every attempt we ever have made, either in the regulatory arena or in the legislative arena, to make that happen. I think they care. I think sunshine is the best disinfectant. And if we can follow not just the money for every refiner, but also have them explain to us why refineries go down, whether it's justified, and when they're going to come back up under penalty of perjury, I think we're going to have a lot fewer refineries going down. I mean, it's like what happened in California in 2000 during our electricity crisis. You know, at the time, ConsumerWatchdog said Enron, Duke, they're bringing down these power plants because they can make more money when there's less electricity. And everyone, including Governor Gray Davis, said, no, they wouldn't do that. We're not going to take them over through eminent domain. We said, no, they're doing it. And turns out, years later, we all found out that they were doing it. And they did it because it's a commodity. And if you make the commodity scarce, you can charge a higher price. And these energy pirates will pursue that. And in this case, it's the gasoline companies. I mean, the oil refiners in the state are only better than Enron and the energy pirates in that what they are doing appears to be legal at the moment. Anyone else with a question in the room? Anyone on the line? Anyone on the line have a question? Anyone on the conference line? Going once, going twice? Okay, well, we're here if you need to chat at 310-392-0522. I'm an extension 327, and Cody is an extension 313. Thanks. All right, thanks.